I love the way you've decorated in here.
Want to get away?
You are now free to move about the country.
I'm open over here.
Southwest, from the beginning, decided it was going to be a different kind of company, a different type of airline, and it never strayed the course. That's largely due to Collen Barrett, who said, "People first. We'll take care of all the other stuff, but the bottom line is we're going to have a successful company, and we're going to treat people right." Southwest Airlines got off the ground on June 18th, 1971, flying just in the state of Texas, and then after deregulation came about, we started going to other states and ultimately became the biggest airline in California. We're the biggest, obviously, in Texas and also in Florida these days, but we fly coast to coast and border to border. We are highly sought after by many communities because when Southwest Airlines comes to your city, the fares drop, and all of a sudden people who thought they couldn't fly before couldn't go, see, and do things that they wanted to. Now you can actually afford to do that. There are well over 160 cities currently seeking Southwest Airlines service right now because when we enter the market, generally fares might drop anywhere from 50 to 70%. And a lot of it, of course, has to do, obviously, with the low fares, but beyond that, it's great customer service. We fly airplanes, but we're really in the customer service business, and that's largely due to somebody like Collen. Collen's role with Southwest goes back to the beginning, quite honestly, at the law firm in San Antonio when Herb Kelleher was doing a lot of the legal work for Southwest. She worked her way up from the administrative ranks, and the only thing she really wanted to be was a great legal secretary. I mean, that was her desire, but she certainly knew that the people side of this business was of paramount importance. As we grew, her responsibilities grew in terms of what next, what's on the horizon for Southwest, and how will this affect people, how will it affect the employees and the customers. She's really the sort of the heart and soul of Southwest Airlines. She's the mother hen. Here she is now, the president of the most successful airline, arguably, in the world.
Here's Collen Barrett. Let's give her a summit welcome. First question I would like to launch is, by what airlines did you come to us here in Chicago?
Well, I hope that the audience won't be shocked to hear that I flew on American Airlines. Because I always like to check out the competition. And because I needed to be at O'Hare, and Southwest does not fly into O'Hare, so it just made sense.
Were they on time or late?
Well, they were very late.
Hey, I asked Jim Miato to join me with this interview because a couple weeks ago, Collen invited us down to Southwest headquarters in Dallas, and we spent an afternoon touring their facility and going into their conference room and meeting some personnel, and spent a couple hours with Collen, and we're just delighted by the whole Southwest story. And you know that Jim is a Harvard business grad, and he got all into the systems and the finances of this company. And I asked him to be able to throw a couple of those questions Collen's way. But let me just begin by asking you the question, just to set some context here. You really did start out as like a legal secretary, never knowing that you would one day rise to the presidency. Tell us about your role in the early days.
I was the legal secretary, and that is what I professed and wanted to be. I had no career goals other than that. I just wanted to be the best darn legal secretary in the world, and I think I came kind of close. I knew nothing about the airline business, but I did know about people, and I did know about customer service. So when my boss decided that he was going to form an airline, I was very interested in the customer service part of it and in the people part of it. It was not something that I planned. It just sort of evolved, and have never looked back. I never do, but I think it was probably the wisest decision I ever made.
Okay, just a couple clarifying questions. Right now, you have how many employees that you oversee?
We have about 32,000.
Let that one sink in. 32,000 employees. And how many airplanes?
450.
450 jets. And
Jets.
Jimmy, this is what you found fascinating, that they're all the same. You want to explain that?
They're all the same airlines? And why? Why just one plane?
Well, we believe in keeping it simple.
Yeah.
We think that, it has all kinds of benefits to us from the efficiency standpoint, productivity standpoint. You only have to train one way of flying the airplane. We have different versions of the 737. But for pilot training, for example, you don't have to have 3 different kinds of training. You don't have to have different simulators. You have the same spare parts, the same, it's very simple,
Yeah,
very
it was amazing.
efficient.
You guys got to know that plane so well, you got to where you could turn around flights in 10 minutes, is that right?
That's correct.
Wouldn't we love that?
Yeah.
See?
We'd love to be able to do it today, but we still do a pretty darn good job of it.
Yeah, no one's close. I think it's 20 minutes, and no one's
Right.
even close to that. So.
Colleen, in the very beginning, what was the vision? You know, when people start churches, most of the time they have kind of a vision. They go, we want to be this kind of church. We have this kind of dream. You know, there's a lot of churches out there, but people start new ones because they have a version of a church in their mind that they feel strongly about. And in the early days when Herb Kelleher and you were thinking about a new airline, what was the vision? What was the main thing?
The real vision was one that we talk about today pretty openly to the public, but the vision really was to open up the skies of America and to give people the freedom to fly. We were living in a world or in a state where nobody was too interested in serving the consumer, in serving the small guy, if you will. Basically, the airline business at that time, at least the carriers that were serving the state of Texas, were interested in, the big dollar ticket. And they happened to maybe fly a few short haul trips, but they weren't, they were really looking for the big dollar long haul ticket. And we decided that there was a real need in the state for low fare carrier, and a carrier that cared to be able, for anyone to be able to have the dream to fly. I mean, back in the late 60s, only about 13% of the public flew. And most of them, I have to tell you, were male. And most of them were really flying for business. I mean, it was rare that people flew for pleasure. And flying was almost thought of as being something that only the elite could afford. Well, we didn't like that at all. So, and we had seen Air California and PSA in California be pretty successful with a short haul sort of intrastate carrier. So that's where we started out.
And who did you see as your competition back then?
Back then, and even, I think you'd be surprised, even a bit today, we saw the automobile as our number one competitor.
Isn't that interesting? I remember years ago when my professor, Len Sessinger, came to the summit.
I know Len.
He observed, yeah, that's right. He observed that when he was looking at Willow Creek and these kinds of churches, he said, you know what? They're not competing against other churches.
No.
They're competing against the alternative use of people's time.
Right.
And it makes you think about doing church in another way. They're not trying to, use drama in churches to just do a better service than another church. They're realizing that they're competing with whatever else someone wants to do with that time. And they're wanting to interest the disinterested, and that's why they do what we do. You guys viewing the car as your competition changes your pricing structure. I mean,
Absolutely.
just everything.
We wanted to own the low fare niche, and we couldn't do that if we weren't quite religious about doing it. I mean, having owning the low fare niche, you can't do that if you don't have low cost. So everything that we look at from how can we do this the most efficiently, the most productively, and still make a little bit of money doing it, because we are, after all, in business to make money. And then in terms of the freedom and the cause that we were all about, we really did want to make a difference. I mean, we started out wanting to make a difference to the state of Texas. Obviously, our dream got a little bigger as we started succeeding in doing that. But
now, Colleen, when you finally decided you were going to start this airline, it was going to be low cost. It was going to place a lot of value on customer service, and so you couldn't get the airline off the ground for how many years? 3.5
years we were in the courts. There were just a few people out there that thought they were the competitors that we were worried about, that just didn't think we should have our day in court, if you will. So,
other airlines wanted to
wanted
keep you on the ground.
I call them the big bad guys. And
2 of 3 which don't exist anymore.
yes, that's correct. And I don't take any great glee in that, but they were very arrogant and quite sure that they could sort of talk us out of ever going into the air. And honestly, I believe with my whole heart and soul that if they had just left us alone and we had gone into the air, we probably would have gone out of business in 2 years, because we really didn't know that much about the airline business. But they were so gosh darn arrogant that it's what motivated us. It literally helped to create what we now proudly call our warrior spirit, which I think is one of the best attributes of our company as a whole.
Yeah, when we were interviewing Colleen earlier, and she talked about this whole warrior spirit thing that emanated from just how hard it was to fight and win all the legal battles to get in the air. I thought of all the startup churches all around the world who have to fight so hard to survive the first 2 or 3 years of their existence. And by hindsight, I mean, we did the same thing at Willow. We were 1 week away from extinction every single week for the first 5 years. And, I almost didn't want to know what the offering was, because if it wasn't a certain number, we were literally done. We had to close the doors. Because Lynn and I were signed on for things personally, and we had raised our personal indebtedness to $20,000, and we had a negative net worth in those days. We couldn't borrow anymore. We were one offering away from extinction, but what it did is it created in our church kind of a fighting spirit. Let's fight for 7 more days to see if we can keep the work open. And so I think those days actually are formative. I wouldn't
Absolutely.
wish our beginning to be different, and you would probably say the same.
I totally agree. People did not know if they were going to have a paycheck for at least, they were that concerned about it. Because even after the 3.5 years of legislative battles, once we got into the air, the other carriers just did about everything they could to make sure that we didn't succeed. So the more that they did that, the more that our very small team at the time, it sort of became the David and Goliath story, and people like to relate. I think most of us can relate to the underdog. And truthfully, again, if we had just been left alone, we didn't have any money for advertising. This whole David and Goliath story is what really caused us to get our first round of publicity and to be known, because we were in the front pages every day with media that we couldn't have, we couldn't have purchased the media coverage. And so it sort of built kind of a kumbaya. What is that? The expression that
Esprit de corps.
yeah, that if we had tried to go out and create it, it might have seemed a little fake, but this was very real. And even though our customers at the time, and you talk about counting at the end of the week. We counted every day. But even if they weren't shareholders of Southwest Airlines, they felt very proprietary about Southwest Airlines because they felt that they were as responsible for our success as we were, and that was true. So there was a real sort of ownership feeling among our customer base, and that holds pretty true today.
What role were you playing in those days?
Oh, I just took whatever role was needed at the time. I couldn't even tell you what my title was when Southwest first started. It was probably executive assistant to the president.
You just did whatever had to
Right.
be done. Okay.
Right.
Can we talk a little bit, in the very early days, Jim, I think you were actually telling me this, you decided not just low cost, but what was the other?
Outrageous customer service.
Yeah.
And I would think that
Positively outrageous.
Positively outrageous customer service. Okay. And I would think that if you charged a premium, you could probably do that really well. I mean, if you charge a lot, you can hire people, have a lot of customer care, all that. But I found it intriguing that you guys said we're going to have positively outrageous customer service, but you're the low-cost,
Right.
carrier.
That
How are
was
you gonna
very
pull that off?
well. It was very important to us. We knew from the get-go that we did not want to be thought of as a cheap carrier, and there is, in my mind, a huge difference between low cost and cheap. So we knew from the very beginning that people were going to either be responsible for our success or our failure. We could have all the best business plans. We could buy the proper equipment. We could have good business minds, but in the end, it's really people that cause other people to want to do business with them. So we spent all of our time and effort, and we still do, 34 years later today, we spend most companies would think, disproportionate amount of time on the hiring process. And you've probably read or heard that we say that we hire for attitude and we train for skill.
Yeah, and I want to push you on that a little bit because that is like a revolutionary concept for church people. I mean, you say you look for a certain type of person with a certain kind of attitude.
Correct.
And you firmly believe if you get that kind of person, eventually you'll be able to load in the skills necessary.
That's correct.
All right. Talk to us more about that. What kind of attitude are you looking for in your hiring process?
We're looking for people, first of all, that have the servant leadership. They want to serve from the heart. You can't be in the airline business or in the customer service business, which is what we're really in, and not want to serve others. So that's probably the number one personality trait that we're looking for. We're also looking for people that are altruistic and caring.
Do you test for these things? How do you?
Well,
how do you?
We test, but not the old psychological tests that some of those bigger carriers have been known to do. We don't believe in any of that.
All right, give us an example of how.
It's real simple.
Let's say Jim and I are in the room. We both want to work for you.
Well, you know what? His smile might do it. It's a.
Well.
Although I did have to apologize for my Harvard degree when
That's right. That's right. MBAs are not usually what we go out looking for, which is probably very unfair because I'm very friendly with many of the Harvard professors that Jim knew. But it's to me. You can talk to a person. We don't have a set of questions like many companies do. You can talk to a person. You could be talking about the waterfall. You could be talking about the garden. You could be talking about a person's family and children. And it doesn't have to really be, certainly we would talk to people about customer service, but you can glean whether a person has the type of traits that we're looking for because they're very real. And you can't memorize answers for them. One of the things that we think is very important, which might sound a bit odd, but we want everyone to have a sense of humor. And we want, when I say that, we take our business, and we want everyone to take our business very seriously, but we don't want them to take themselves too awfully seriously. Life is pretty short. And we aren't into pompous or egos or any of that. And we have to have people that have thick skin. You can't deal with the public, as you well know, without being thick-skinned. And you have to be able to laugh about yourself a bit.
But again, I want to press you on this. How do the people who do the hiring at Southwest
Know that? Well, I could give you hundreds of examples, but one of the ways that we can find out if a person has a sense of humor is that we can throw them for a loop when they walk into the sit-down first interview. I mean, for example, we've had recruiters walk out into the reception room wearing pajamas. We've had, just crazy things, just to see how, someone will react. Do they say nothing? Do they just go on? Do they, it's kind of like, when somebody has a big spot on their tie and it's the one thing you don't want to stare at or whatever. So, there's a lot of ways. One of the things that I do personally is we have a big cafeteria in our building, and many, many times we do group interviews. So people are up there having lunch or breakfast or whatever. I like to walk up into the cafeteria and I like to watch people's behavior when they are walking into a room. And I want to see whether they go through the line, get their food, and go sit in a corner by themselves. Or if they just walk in, it's sort of an open style, kind of like a picnic type, very open environment. And if they just walk up to a table and sit down and say, "Can I join you?" And it makes a huge difference in my mind. I want to see whether people make eye contact when they pass in the hall. They're very simple things, but they can tell you a whole lot about a person. And it may be the best way to describe it, Bill, is to talk about the opposite. We talk about hiring for attitude and training for skills, and I don't want anyone in the audience, especially the ladies, to get nervous that means that we would put a pilot in the cockpit that didn't know how to fly an airplane.
but a tremendous attitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
We would never do that. But my point is that we could have a pilot applicant come in that has 100 letters of recommendation and all kinds of medals for flying, and just have won award after award for his flying or her flying prowess. But if there was something in his attitude or behavior during the interview process, during the flying on our airplane to come to the interview, during his exchange with the receptionist in our reception room, that would be a turnoff for us, and that person would not be offered a job. We try to model our behavior, and one thing that we require and request and insist upon is that all employees at Southwest are respectful of others. And even if you didn't read our mission statement, which is hanging about every 3 feet in every Southwest location, if you simply knew that basically our mission statement tells everyone that we will follow the golden rule every day, you would know enough to know about what our number one expectation is of our people. And that is that they will treat others like they want to be treated. And it doesn't matter whether it's a public service, a public contact position, or a backroom office worker. That is a requirement, and it's really a way of life at Southwest. And we first, as leaders, we have to hold ourselves accountable for that. But once we do that, we're very comfortable in holding others accountable for it.
I was, as I was thinking about that, I was reading about it in the book, and I just wanted to stand up and cheer when I heard that you guys actually encourage them to use common sense. And
you may stand up and cheer. I had to fight to get that one on the list.
Just no kidding. Just to have common sense win the day was so.
It's you cannot write a rule or a procedure for every occasion. And it just slays me that people think that you can. And I don't want anybody on our payroll that thinks that I have to tell them how to handle every single customer service issue that they could come up with, because I want people to feel empowered as long as I mean, we have guidelines. Obviously, you can't have 62 locations and 2,000 people and not have some guidelines. But that's what they are. They're guidelines, and we have some safety laws that must be followed. But in terms of pure raw dealing with people, just relationships with people, you have guidelines that are written to be broken if the right set of circumstances presents itself. And as long as you use common sense and good judgment when you're making them, I might go to you later and say, I probably wouldn't have made this call, and here's why. But you won't be criticized for leaning toward the customer or toward what seemed to be the most compassionate or appropriate thing to do.
Okay, when we were at Southwest, I would have to say, more than any other word that comes to my mind when we were hanging around their headquarters, was that you have actually created a family.
Yes.
At Southwest. And tell us about these picture walls and all of that. This just blew my mind.
Well, my son for years has said that I really should own stock in Kodak and Hallmark, because that's all I do is send cards and capture moments, memorialize occasions in picture form. So our walls and our offices are like an open scrapbook. And that, to me, is what a family is all about. You want to memorialize special occasions. And you can't say that you are a family member and then not do the things for and with your employees that you would do with your own immediate family members. And when I say that, what I mean is that we try to acknowledge every significant event in our employees' lives, be it personal or professional. So I tend to be, being the sentimental person that I am, I tend to make sure that people get birthday cards, they get anniversary cards for their date of hire at the company. If they have a birth or a death, I mean, it's not just, you just like with family members, you celebrate the victories, but you also, if they're grieving, you grieve with them, or if they're hurting, you hurt with them. And you really just open your heart and try, again, it's pretty simple. It goes back to practice the golden rule.
But it doesn't feel very corporate to me.
But you know what? I don't like corporate. I don't want to run a big corporate company. I want to run a family, and I want to run, I want, maybe a better way to say it is that usually family units, they're run with love. That's the basic beginning and the heartbeat. And to me, Southwest Airlines is a cause. And, excuse me, we use the word love from the beginning in a wholesome way. Back in the early 70s, it was not quite so, maybe it was a little more a sexy way, but it was appropriate for the times. But we use the word love in a very wholesome way. And, if you have love in your heart, it just makes a lot of things go a lot easier. Now, that doesn't mean that that families don't have to practice tough love, because we all have probably had to do that at one time or another. I raised a teenage boy by myself, and I learned a lot about tough love from his, when he was 17 to 20 years old. But
now, this picture wall, Jim and I walked with Colleen down hundreds and hundreds of yards of hallways where these pictures just go from the floor to the ceiling, and just one right after the next, and they're of weddings and graduations and all that. Then we turned a corner, and it was the pet
wall.
The pet wall. Now, and then we happened to run into Herb Kelleher, and he pulled me off to the side, and he said, that pet wall thing, he said, that was a greater idea than the execution actually allowed for. And I said, why? And he said, well, imagine you have several thousand people bringing their pets to work on Pet Picture Day. And you got the dogs chasing the cats through the hallway, and animals running all around, and he just burst out laughing. He said, "What a riot that day was."
And our building manager did not speak to me for 4 months.
All right, but
Bye.
so, I mean, there really is a people-centered culture around there, but then also, of course, with all this loving family kind of feeling thing, as the family grows, you couldn't provide that yourself.
No.
And so because Willow has quite a large staff, and I have a very hard time trying to be as personal with the staff of Willow as I'd like to be. And so I challenged Colleen on that. And Colleen has 6 full-time people who just help her run Southwest in a family-oriented way. 6 full-time people who just protect the family feeling. Now, to me, that just says you hire according to a value. You staff what you believe is really, really important. They're a low-cost airline, but they pay a lot of money for that other value, a high family feeling. So tell us about, why did you start hiring these assistants, and tell us about that.
Well, the group that Bill is referring to is called self-named. They self-named themselves the Internal Customer Care Group. And clearly, I used to run around with a little notepad, and I'd be in a station at an airport, and someone would be celebrating their birthday. So I'd write it down. I'd write down the name and the date, and I'd bring it back. And I'm not very computer literate, so everything I did was manual. And it got to the point where I simply couldn't keep that manual list up anymore. So one of the first people that I hired in there was simply to find a way to get all the birthdays and anniversaries computerized so that it could still be personal. I could still sign the cards, I could still write the notes, but at least it would be a little more organized. Then as we grew and as we aged, we started having people that had to go out on very serious medical leaves or what have you, or OJIs, of course, and that sort of thing. And so I wanted to start acknowledging those things. Then I realized that if workers were in large locations, you might have a small station which had 100 people, it was pretty easy, at least you would hope, for the local manager to stay in touch and make sure that they knew we were thinking about them and all that sort of thing. But if you got to a Midway, goodness gracious, the employees that we have located at Midway are in the thousands. So there was no way, it wasn't because people didn't care, but after a while, if somebody was out for 2 or 3 weeks, you're so caught up in the day-to-day crisis of running the airline that, they might be forgotten, and they might tend to think that we forgot them. So I hired 2 or 3 people to start calling these folks. It's kind of interesting. At first, there was a little bit of pushback from that. I think people might have thought we were calling to check, to be sure that they were legitimately out, which was hurtful to me because I just couldn't imagine that anyone would think that. But anyway, that's life. So, but once we got over that and people realized that we weren't, we weren't like their department head or their, and all that.
You were just their president.
We were just, yeah. That went well, and through that, they started sort of sharing. They would say, well, did you know, I was talking to a flight attendant one day who was out due to being hurt during turbulence in the air, and she said, did you know that, Kathy Jones is out with the same thing? And I said, no, I didn't, thank you. So we kind of set up our own little network to get that kind of information, and now, we're of a size that we have people that are out with very serious, maybe even, definitely even life-threatening type situations. And so we kind of track all that, and we will have someone that might be having a very hard time with cancer call someone else who's just been diagnosed with cancer, that sort of thing.
Right. Colleen, Jim and I think, asked the question to you at about the exact same moment when you were telling us about all this family feeling. We were like, okay, then what if you have to fire somebody? because
Well-
when you have to fire somebody from a corporate feeling environment, that's a lot easier than when you disown a family member. So tell us how the whole firing thing happens in a family context.
I don't think that letting someone go is ever easy. I know it's not, and it's always painful, even when you know that it is absolutely the right thing to do or the only thing that can be done. We are very clear with our employees as to what our expectations are of them. And we are very repetitive and take painstaking efforts to assure that they know what the expectation is. And as I said earlier, we have very few rules. But the few rules that we do have in terms of work performance and in terms of the way that you treat people are, there are commandments, and they must be followed.
So, like one that you mentioned was if there's a 5-person flight team,
Right.
and someone is late to the airport, which makes it impossible for that flight to take off on time, that's not a happy thing, right?
That is not a happy thing. Now, we make it very clear from the beginning, and in-flight is the example that I'll use because it's the group, the flight attendants, it's the group that is usually the youngest work group that we have, and so we have to be very, very clear that you must be to work on time. We pride ourselves, one of the 3 statistics that we study every day and every week and every month is our on-time performance. And you cannot run an on-time airline if you don't have the 5 critical crew members to be on that airplane. You can't even close the door to the airplane to push back unless you have 5 crew members on our 737. So we make it very clear in the very beginning that you cannot cause a plane to be late. And so you have time frames within which you must call us to tell us if you... We don't have these 32,000 people in all the cities that we serve. So, you know, if you decide that 5 minutes before you're supposed to report that you don't want to come to work that day, we can't get another flight attendant out there in 20 minutes. We may not even have another flight attendant in that city. So it's very critically important.
How many chances do they get?
They get 2. 2 strikes and you're out. And they know it. We make no bones about it.
Do they cry unfair if, like, they had a flat tire on the way to the airport?
Oh, yeah, but you know what? That's what they should use their first 2 for. You can't, I mean, no, it's that serious. You know, I overslept. We'll set 5 alarm clocks. You know, it's just not acceptable in our business. Something else might be, but this isn't. And
Now, what's interesting about that to me, though, is that you guys are very emphatic about the fact that the customer is number 2 at Southwest Airlines.
That's correct.
Who's number 1?
the employee, and we are, and we will work and work to make things. Our thinking on that, by the way, I think you know this, but we feel that if we spend 80% of our time assuring that our employees have a good, healthy, fun-spirited work environment, if they are treated with respect, if we show appreciation for who they are and for what they do, we say thank you and please and treat them with respect, that they in turn will feel better about what they're doing. We want people to want to be in their positions. They will in turn provide good customer service to our passengers. So I probably devote 80-90% of my time on the employees. That transcends, hopefully, to the customer, to the passenger, but we call them both customers. We approach customer service internally and externally exactly the same way. So if employees feel good, if they feel that they're paid appropriately, if they feel that we care about them and they're treated well, then they need to come through on the commitment, the very little commitment, really, that we've asked them to do. Show up on time, be decent to one another. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to be yourself. One of the best freedoms we offer, by the way. We offer the freedom to be the individual that we hired.
Well, and you guys also value forgiveness. You talk a lot
Yes.
about forgiveness. I
Yes.
remember reading one part where an executive made a $400,000 mistake, and
I'm glad it wasn't me.
but he was later on promoted. And
That's
I
true.
mean,
We are very forgiving, and we are. If someone is having a slower time, maybe catching on to something, again, not flying, but something a little more menial in task, we are very, very forgiving and very, very patient. It's just there are just a few things that we simply can't be patient about because it's who we are, and one of them is that we are an on-time, proactive customer service deliver.
Colleen,
of a product.
two more things I'd like to discuss before our time is up. One has to do with crisis management, because you had a huge crisis around 911. And the other has to do with you being a woman leader, and what is kind
Aren't all women leaders? I don't know what's so unusual about that.
I'm glad this is my last interview. I'm telling you, I've just been taking a beating this year. But yes, but I suppose in a certain way, all women are leaders. Is that enough of a concession, or? Well, let's talk about that as long as we're laughing at me. It is. I mean, the statistics would show that very few women wind up as presidents of huge corporations. And your experience has been from a legal secretary to president. And were there any challenges that were unique to you being a woman as you climbed to this place of leadership?
I think, I really think this is a fair answer. I think probably the reason that I ended up in this role is because I never aspired to it, honestly. There was no ladder. I wasn't climbing. I was, it just evolved. And I think that really, male or female, first you have to be a good follower before you can be a leader. And I think I was a great follower. So I don't know if that's a good answer or not. The airline business, generally speaking, is not known for, it's sort of the good old boy network, and so it's not really known for its females leadership. But Southwest has never followed the mold, and I don't think that Herb from day one really ever saw gender. I think he saw work performance. I just don't think he thinks in those terms.
Have you done anything during your presidency to try to proactively encourage women to do everything they can do or be all they can be?
I am asked a lot, and I know that I'm asked to be a speaker a lot because I'm a woman, which, and I have many, many friends that are fantastic female leaders. But at Southwest, I mentor. I try to help people grow. I try to be part of people's development and growth. I don't really think of it as a female thing. I know it's very important to some people. I think of it more as a just plain leadership development for everybody, honestly. And, I'm sometimes called Mom. So I think to that extent, maybe the nurturing of females I think we have a little bit up on you guys in that score. Now, you might have just as much love in your heart as I do, but so I don't know. It's just a subject I'm not too comfortable with. I'd rather just talk about leadership,
Well, Colleen,
generally speaking.
how do you do leadership development in Southwest Airlines as a leader? How do you do that practically?
Well, I lead by example, treat people with respect, never allow someone to lose their own self-esteem, talk to people, listen to people, and guide and, I don't know, we do a lot of, there's certain skills that you can teach, but I think a lot of it just has to do with relationships. And I don't, you can be a leader if you're a shoe shine person. I just don't, I think I don't traditionally think of leadership in the corporate world. I mean, we have leaders everywhere. And I think that one of the things that we try to do at Southwest when we're hiring is we try to hire leaders. Doesn't matter what the position. We want people that can lead a cause. So I'm a big cause person. So to me, it doesn't matter. Your cause can be multifaceted or it can be one. In my case, or in Southwest's case, I think, as I said, the cause was to open up the skies of America and to allow people the opportunity to fulfill dreams. Now, that might sound a little Pollyanna-ish or movie-ish, but really, that's what we've done. We have enabled people that before we went into their city, maybe they could go see their grandkids, once a year because that's all they could afford. Now they can do it 5 or 6 times. Sometimes the son-in-laws don't like that a whole lot, but, and you should just go on and on and on with stories like that. I have pen pals from all over the United States because they really feel that Southwest has been part of a bigger thing for them, whether it's, now I don't know if the audience will think this is funny or not, but I love this. We're known for, it's a term I don't like a lot, but we're known sort of as cattle car because of our open seating and, we don't have assigned seats. And it pains me every time that someone uses that expression, but I've gotten quite used to it over 34 years. Well, there's some things that are not all bad about open seating. One of them is that we've had many people meet and fall in love or form business deals or what have you and form long-lasting relationships. I hear from those people all the time. I hear from them all the time. We get invitations to weddings from people that will say, you have been so much a part of my courtship, or people going to, I'm telling you, it's true. And every one of them just touches my heart. People go to college in one state, they work in another state, and because of our low fares and our convenient flights and our reliable flights, they can go home every weekend, or they can see each other twice a month. Things they never could have done. I don't even know how I got off on this tangent.
All right, last
but
question.
It's what I have a passion for.
Yeah, and we can feel it. And we only just have about 30 seconds left before Jim's going to wind this up. But Colleen, you told us what happened after 9/11, and all of the airliners of all the airlines were grounded, and you had a plan in effect already. There's never been a fatal plane crash at Southwest Airlines, but you have an emergency plan in place. And she was explaining how you have to have an emergency plan in place if you're running airlines for a whole bunch of potential situations, crashes, hijackings, whatever. And you had a plan in place, and 911 hit, and one of your top objectives was to get stranded Southwest passengers home, and you did that through busing and all that. But just with just a few seconds that remain, you talked about when you were trying to get the first Southwest Airlines flight back into the air. Just recreate that a little bit, how the employees came out of the building and all of that.
It really was a moment that will remain in my memory forever. And it was typical of Southwest because most times our people don't need to be asked to do something, and they don't need to be told what to do. They do it instinctively and intuitively from the heart. We had worked for almost 72 hours nonstop. Everybody knew in our headquarters building what time the first flight was going to take off from Love Field somehow through email or whatever, I don't know. We had been in the boardroom really for 3 days with maybe a couple of showers in between. And we didn't know if there were going to be any passengers on it. And we also weren't sure that we'd have 5 crew members. But about 5 minutes before departure, I looked at my watch and I said, you know what, we need to go downstairs and watch, because our headquarters is right off the
Right off the
concourse
runway.
is right off the runway is right outside our building. So I walked out. I was on the second floor, and as I opened the door to the boardroom, the whole office, the whole building was, it was like an evacuation. It was like a fire drill. Everyone was very somber. Everyone was very quiet, but everyone was walking downstairs to go out into our large parking lot, and they lined up against the fence. And our lady in our finance department, the plane taxied right in front of us. The captain saw us, and we weren't so close that we could see heads, but somehow we just knew that they knew we were there. And a lady in our finance department started singing "God Bless America," and it was just unbelievable. There was not a dry eye in the place, and I later talked to an employee who was on the plane, and he didn't know what we were singing, but he knew that we were singing. And he said there wasn't a dry eye on the few passengers that were in those seats. And we actually heard from people that said, I didn't even need to fly. I just needed to show you that I was willing to. And if you were there, I wanted to show you that I was going to give you my support because you've been good to me for 30 years. Anyway, it was a wonderful thing, very uplifting experience.
Let's thank Collen Barrett.